Okay, so far, welcome again to our press conference on Monsanto plagiarism and on the legal complaint we are going to file in several European countries today. Since the renewal decision last Monday, we prepared a legal complaint we are going to file today in Austria, Germany, France, and Italy. And that's why I say hello to Helmut Burtscher from Global 2000. He's our glyphosate campaigner and author of the book, The Glyphosate Files. I say hello to lawyer Dr. Josef Unterweger, who's gonna present the legal aspects of our complaint today. I say hello to Angeliki Lysimaru from PAN Europe. PAN Europe, the Pesticide Action Network, PAN, is supporting our complaint. And I say hello to François Viret from Génération Future in Paris. And yeah, so we start now with Helmut Burtscher and his presentation, and then I give over to Josef Unterweger, then Angeliki and François. Helmut, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for your interest. Hello to everyone. Article 11 of the European Pesticides Regulation requires from regulatory authorities to conduct an independent, objective and transparent assessment of health risks. Court documents from the US, the so-called Monsanto papers, as well as our investigations and an expertise on plagiarism, however, suggest that the German Federal Institute for Risk Assessment, BFR, and the European Food Safety Agency, EFSA, refused to conduct an independent assessment of health risks, and hereby enabled a pesticide that otherwise most likely would not have been or would not have met the criteria for reapproval in the European Union to remain on the European market and harm the health of users and consumers. So now I try to start a presentation, and it looks like it would work. Because we believe that the breach of regulations by the authorities could have criminal relevance, we considered criminal charges. As always, the presumption of innocence applies. For a better understanding of the following, we first recall the timeline of the approval procedure. It began in May 2012 when 24 manufacturers under Monsanto's leadership submitted an application for approval in Germany. They stated that glyphosate meets the criteria for reauthorization in the EU. The BFR made an evaluation and also concluded a year and a half later that glyphosate meets the criteria for reauthorization. The BFR report went to public consultation and was later evaluated and supplemented by EFSA and the member states. But then something happened. Shortly before the official report was finalized, the WHO's Cancer Research Agency, IARC, stated that there was sufficient evidence for the carcinogenicity of glyphosate in animal experiments and strong evidence of its DNA damaging effects. However, 10 years later, EFSA and BFR declared glyphosate as non-carcinogenic and non-DNA damaging. The EU Commission then instructed its authorities to evaluate and compare its own cancer assessment to that of IARC and integrate the result into the European risk assessment. Earlier than usual, the IARC published its comprehensive monograph on glyphosate, which provides the scientific basis for the IARC evaluation. The BFR immediately started its evaluation of the IARC monograph. The BFR declared IARC to be comprehensible and conclusive, but nevertheless maintained its original assessment. Glyphosate is not carcinogenic and not genotoxic, not DNA damaging. And after that, EFSA started to evaluate the BFR assessment, including also 28 member states, and then published its eagerly awaited final conclusion on 12th of November, also stating glyphosate is okay, not carcinogenic, not genotoxic. Significant omissions and failures by the authorities have occurred at all stages of the approval process according to our information. It started with the BFR's copy-paste of the assessment of particular sensitive independent studies from the manufacturer's dossier. The dossier includes compilations and evaluations of industry's own studies, which it regards as trade secrets, and also independent published studies. The authority now had to independently, objectively, and transparently assess whether an authorization is possible. The decisive factors are the so-called hazard-based cutoff criteria in: is the substance carcinogenic, is the substance mutagenic, or toxic to reproduction? If yes, then no approval is possible. This is very, very different from pesticide legislations in other countries, especially in the USA, where a risk assessment can also lead to, say, carcinogenic substances are authorized. But this is not the case in European legislation. No matter what BFR is telling you, no matter what other agencies are telling you, this is just a legal fact. And what we now will have to look is on an example of mutagenicity, the basis of which is genotoxicity as a DNA damaging effects, how the assessment of the authorities worked. It started with industry presenting 46 industry studies that all reported that glyphosate does not cause damage to DNA. In stark contrast to that, 75% of independent published studies report that glyphosate damages DNA, which is 45 out of 60 studies. But the manufacturer simply said that these studies were not relevant, not reliable. And the main question now is, what did the authority? The BFR did the same as the manufacturers. It gave its go-ahead. Glyphosate is not mutagenic. We can be sure based on the huge number of studies we made. These were the original words of one BFR man. Where the authority took this security from is illustrated by the following image. The BFR has literally copy-pasted the whole assessment from industry's dossier created by the long-term Monsanto employee and Monsanto consultant Larry D. Keir. What you see here are the 46 pages of the special chapter on published data on genotoxicity of the BFR's assessment report. 94%, so everything I have marked red here, can also be found literally in the manufacturer's dossier. The yellow marked texts were only introduced at a later stage of the approval procedure involving member states and the EFSA, and only 2% of the text originate from the pen of the BFR. And these are only numbering of tables and numbering of headlines, as well as archive numbers for the more than 60 studies whose summaries and evaluations BFR has copied before, without exception, from the manufacturer's dossier. The authority has not copied the clue that the true author of this review is the Monsanto man Larry Keir. Also, in other chapters of the BFR report, the BFR seems to have deliberately omitted references to the true authors, as the following example shows on the left. Industry dossier. Here's the study that shows, for example, increased risk of non-Hodgkin lymphoma in farmers who use glyphosate. The manufacturer assessed this study to be neither relevant nor reliable. Below is commentary by Monsanto scientist John Acquavilla, who criticized this study. On the right side, the authority report. Everything was the same. It was copied. The devaluation of the study, the comment of the Monsanto scientist, but not its name, because the source of the comment was replaced by the general phrase, additional comment. In the same way, sources of commentaries were also hidden in other chapters. For example, glyphosate task force response was systematically translated into additional comments. The expert opinion of Stefan Weber, a Salzburgian media professor, states, all in all, the writers of the report must be accused of significant scientific misconduct and of fulfilling all the definitional criteria of text plagiarism in the sense of conscious deception about the true authorship. But the authorities reject these accusations. EFSA Pesticides Divisioner Jose Tarazona told the European Parliament that the allegations about plagiarism came from people who do not understand the process. For example, he presented examples of summaries and assessments from industry, which had indeed been first copy-pasted and then contradicted by the authorities with their own comments, written in italics. However, Tarazona took these examples with which he wanted to demonstrate to the European Parliament that EFSA carried out an independent assessment from parts of the assessment report that did not deal with independent studies and were not subject to allegations of plagiarism at any time. This misleading arguments recently also appeared repeatedly in less well-researched media articles. For example, Zeit made a fact check which was not so good. BFR President Andreas Hensel also persistently insists that the plagiarism allegation is unfounded and fictitious, and EFSA Director Bernhard Url even describes it as an orchestrated campaign to discredit the scientific process. Therefore, our complaint is intended to instigate an independent and objective examination by the courts of the integrity of our expert opinion. This all happened before the WHO surprisingly evaluated glyphosate and thus before its cancer classification. So finally, we will have a look now at the least the evaluation of the IARC's cancer classification monograph by EFSA and BFR has been performed independently and objectively. To make it short, the answer is no. According to an email conversation of US EPA employees, which has been recently published as a part of Monsanto papers, this email dates from the 22nd of May. It's from Michael Goodis to Jess Rowland, and it starts with, Jess, I was approached by EFSA about glyphosate. They are planning to issue a review, including a cancer classification in August. So this must be the review performed by BFR of the IARC monograph. But now it comes. They are saying they will disagree with IARC. And what is really interesting is the date of this email. It's the 22nd of May. So EFSA readily tells a US agency that it will evaluate and contradict something that it does not know at this time, because the IARC has only begun to write the monograph on glyphosate and will finish it in end of July, so in more than 2 months. And the BFR will evaluate this only in August. Member state authorities will not be included in the scientific process until September. So all this will happen, and EFSA will be able to release its much anticipated final conclusion, as we know today, not before November the 12th of 2015. So what's the point of all these hocus pocus if EFSA agreed with the US EPA on the outcome in May? Why producing this addendum? Why the consultancy of 75 experts from member states, EFSA always talks about, a production solely to create an illusion of the safety of glyphosate addressed to the European public. In any case, the US EPA and Monsanto knew, according to the US court documents, months before that this whole procedure would be a mere fake, and it was already clear that EFSA, like the US authorities, will contradict the IARC cancer classification in the end. There are further indications that Monsanto, in the Monsanto papers, of collusion between EFSA and the EPA, and even indications of a possible direct influence from Monsanto. A particular role could have been played by Jess Rowland, a leading apitoxicologist that came under suspicion of conspiring with Monsanto and is referred to in some media as Monsanto's mole at the EPA. It is therefore kind of explosive that it was this man who offered himself to EPA as a contact person. So if we go to the email, you can see here he was addressed, and he was the man who said, who was asked, would that be you? And in a later email, he answers, yes, it would be me. And it is thanks to Peter Clausing, who had to leave before, that we now know that it was precisely this Jess Rowland, for example, that has made a significant contribution to a highly questionable EFSA decision, namely the elimination of a key study from the assessment, a study showing that the same type of cancer that IARC found to be associated with glyphosate in humans is also associated with glyphosate in mice, in industry mice studies. Further interesting details on this subject can be found directly in the text of our complaint and in the enclosed documents and cross-references, as well as in my book, The Glyphosate Files. Now I hand over to Josef Unterweger, who will deal with the question of responsibility with a special focus on criminal law. Thanks.
Thank you, Helmut Butcher. Mr. Unterweger, I hand over to you.
When plagiarism is used to create misleading evidence, it is more than just a question of copyright. If a regulatory authority issues an inaccurate expert opinion, it is liable for that opinion. This is known as public or state liability. If a pesticide is in use, which would have been prohibited years ago, were it not for an incorrect expert opinion from the regulator, then the regulator who has prepared the opinion is liable for damages that have arisen since it was issued. Pursuant to Regulation number 1107/2009 of the European Union, in relation to the approval or extension of approval for pesticides, the Bundesinstitut für Risikobewertung, BfR, and the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, are obliged to make an independent, objective, and transparent assessment in the light of current scientific and technical knowledge. Instead of drafting an assessment report in accordance with the legal provisions, the BfR plagiarized substantial parts of the report, taking pages of text word for word from the application for extension of the approval for glyphosate without attributing authorship and without performing its own assessment. The EFSA accepted the BfR's plagiarized assessment report without criticism and falsified it in line with a telephone request from a lobbyist, excluding relevant studies indicating the carcinogenicity of glyphosate from the assessment without carrying out its own review and declaring glyphosate to be harmless. Both the BfR and the EFSA were in breach of the requirement obliging them to make an independent, objective, and transparent assessment of the application for the extension of the approval of glyphosate in the light of current scientific and technical knowledge. Consequently, pursuant to the criminal codes, which are applicable all over Europe, there are grounds for suspicion of serious commercial fraud as a result of the use of incorrect or falsified data, as well as offenses pursuant to bodily harm or willful endangerment of the public or willful damage of the environment or impairing the credibility of certificates. Glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. Glyphosate is applied in large quantities, both in Austria as well as in Europe. It's both in agriculture and by amateur gardeners. Glyphosate residues have been found in the population. Placing carcinogenic products on the market is sufficient to produce or to cause cancer. This could be considered bodily injury or even homicide. Customers were deceived in the expectation that they were acquiring products which, I quote, do not have any harmful effect on human or animal health or any unacceptable effects on the environment, unquote. That's stated in Regulation number 1107/2009 of the European Union. Indeed, glyphosate is likely to have a carcinogenic effect on humans. The consequences of these unlawful actions will occur both in Austria as well as in other European countries. Therefore, as well the Austrian courts as the other courts in other European member states are competent to adjudicate on this matter. That's why we gave that complaint to the courts. Thank you.
Thank you, Josef Unterweger. And now I hand over directly to Angeliki Lysimachou from Pan Europe. Pan Europe is filing the legal complaint together with us, Global 2000, and together with Génération Future. So after Angeliki, I hand over to François, but first of all, Angeliki Lysimachou. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Because I cannot hear myself. Wait a minute. Okay. Sorry, I have I have an audio problem. Okay, but you can listen to me. You can hear me. Okay. Yes, I just wanted. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that the reason we're very worried is because this tactic might result in releasing actually harmful chemicals in the environment, and to include, I would just like to focus on the scientific peer-reviewed literature, because that was a decision for the pesticide regulation that to include it in the regulatory assessment of pesticides, to include it in the evaluation, because it can provide relevant information that is not within, it cannot be found in the industry protocols. So this was in the pesticide regulation in 2009. This was clearly, as it was mentioned before, there was this is a mandate of the regulation. And what we've seen here, I mean, in a preliminary study that was done also together with Génération Future, we found that the whole literature, from the whole literature that reports toxicity in glyphosate, only half of it was included in the peer review, in the review assessment report of that was done by the rapporteur member state BFR. And out of this, only 24 were actually discussed in the report, and all of those were rejected because they were not relevant and not reliable. And now we see that this is actually even copy-pasted without any further addition from the rapporteur itself. And not only is copy-pasted, but also it's not identified. And looking into the other dossiers, we're seeing that this is happening for other pesticides as well. And we would like to investigate this further as well. And so, and also all these studies that they were rejected from the European authorities, they were actually taken into account from the International Research Institute of Cancer, IARC. So we need to investigate why this is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Angeliki. François Viret, you have the word. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, much
louder if possible.
Yes, much has been said already by Helmut and Angeliki. Just to remind that last year we filed a complaint in France for aggravated deception and also endangering the lives of other people, based on a report previously published by Global 2000 that we translated, that clearly shows that the way by which the industry studies have been analyzed was really wrong, and that already a lot of findings were there in the official industry studies that showed that definitely glyphosate was carcinogenic. This time, this new complaint we have been joining with great pleasure shows that on the independent academic studies, we also have parts of data showing that this product is really dangerous regarding genotoxicity and cancer. And then once again, a system has been put in place not to take these studies into account. That is a copy-paste technique that really shows that what we have in the dossier is in fact the opinion from industry on these independent studies and not a proper analysis, not a scientific analysis. So this is totally unacceptable for us. And we want justice to have an in-depth look into this affair. Also because we are afraid that it could be much the same with other pesticides and in other dossiers. So we have to have an opinion, and we have to, in fact, what we want is at the end of the day, after a fair trial, we want to have all the available science taken into account, all the published, validated science, because that's what the regulation from 2009 said. We must take into account all the academic studies and offer the highest level of protection for the European environment and for the health of Europeans also. Thank you.
Thank you, François. Just a short remark. We come now to our last speaker, Koen Hertoge from Pan Italy. If you have any questions, then afterwards you are able to ask your questions. Please give me a short note over the chat function below of your browser window, and then I will give you a sign. So, Koen, the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Just one remark from our side, which is Pan Italia, Pesticide Action Network Italy. For us, as an organization representing the civil society, it's very important to support this legal action, this complaint also in Italy. We need to clearly show that the renewal process of glyphosate, as mentioned by Helmut and by Dr. Unterweger before, that the renewal process was not transparent, objective, and independent as stated in the European legislation. It seems like the European citizens have lost the trust in the European institutions that are supposed to protect the health of the citizens by having this process in place. So we clearly need to investigate and it's absolutely needed that the citizens know what's going on. And this is not only related to glyphosate, but this is related to all pesticides, all authorizations of pesticides in the European Union. So this is very important that this is being clarified by this legal action. Thank you.
Thank you, Koen. Are there any questions? So, Madame Aurel, you put on your camera. Do you have a question? You're muted. Please unmute yourself in the left corner of your browser.
Okay. Left down.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet some of you finally. I've got a couple of very basic technical boring questions, and then a couple of more precise ones. First, what is the date of the filing of the complaint the same in all the 4 countries? And what is the date?
So I would ask Josef Unterweger, do we file it today in Berlin and Austria? I think so. And I just got the Italian complaint on Friday, so then it was already finished. So Koen, do you know if in Italy, in Parma, it will be also filed today or during the week?
The version that we received on Friday was a draft version, so we still need to do some minor adaptations. But we believe that within the next week or within the next 10 days, the filing of the complaint will be done in Parma. Parma is, as known, where the headquarters of EFSA is located. So yeah, it's in process.
So does it mean that the complaints will be filed at different moments in the 4 countries?
Helmut, please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Austria and Germany will be filed today. Okay. This was my information before and was now also said by Josef Unterweger. François, it's in France, it's even more complicated because you have an ongoing complaint and you will just add these new informations to the ongoing complaint, as I understood it, because the issue of plagiarism and this has not been part of the first complaint. Did you already do this, or is it just happening today or some days later?
Well, we are finishing the translation of a document from building on your elements. We already sent all the data on the copy-paste part of the affair to the tribunal in Lyon, in France. And we now need to send additional information on plagiarism. That's where we are.
Okay.
And I also want to add that there already has been filed a complaint in Portugal by a supporting Portugal organization, Transgenicos Fora. This is not a complaint which has been filed by Pesticide Action Network and Global 2000, but by a supporting organization who has also been supporting the European Citizens Initiative Stop Glyphosate.
One of the other technical questions, do you have any idea of the delays in which the justice will process the complaints in the different countries? Because France can be very slow.
The same could be for Italy. It takes some time in Italy to have this complaint filed and also to start the investigation. But we will try to make as much pressure as possible within our possibilities, of course.
One of the other technical questions, do you have any idea of the delays in which the justice will process the complaints in the different countries? Because France can be very slow.
The same could be for Italy. It takes some time in Italy to have this complaint filed and also to start the investigation. But we will try to make as much pressure as possible within our possibilities, of course.
think it's now up to the state attorneys in all the countries. We had some experience from last year. We filed, the basis was the fact that BFR did not evaluate the statistical evaluations provided by industry. It was about industry studies. So they overlooked almost 90% of positive significant cancer findings in mice and also in rat. And this was the basis of a complaint then that led to investigations in Austria quite soon, within, I think, 2 weeks after we filed it in Vienna, which was really surprising, positively surprising to us. And we also got became a party of the investigation. This was guaranteed to us by the attorney first, but then Monsanto attorney did intervene, and we were cut off from information after that. And half a year later, the complaint was just dropped away, or they stopped investigating. Yeah. So it was not a big success, but it was some success that it started. Yeah. Because I think it was the first time that NGOs just filed a criminal complaint against authorities because we think that they did not do the job, which could cause harm to people all over Europe. And I think this time, maybe we are a step further. The background is even more close to the European pesticide legislation. It's Article 11 in the pesticide regulation that is violated, that is, in our opinion, severely violated. And it leads to the fact that, published studies that the European Parliament, that the European Commission and member states have decided they should be considered in a European risk assessment, that they have been completely excluded. And not because authorities decided to do so because because science isn't worth anything, they even didn't look at it. So, or there is no trace of authorities having looked at the most crucial published studies that led the IARC to conclude that glyphosate is a carcinogen in animals, without any doubt. That, I mean, in case of carcinogenesis in animals, it's even a little bit more complicated because there's the industry studies. But this was supported by strong evidence of genotoxicity and was supported by published state data on human evidence. So all in all, published data were very, very crucial for the IARC classification, and they were completely excluded in the European process, even though there was a big improvement in the European law in 2009. The second big improvement, I think, was to enforce the hazard-based approach, so that no risk assessment, no risk discussions can ever lead to put a pesticide that has carcinogenic properties in animal experiments on the market. So this is something really, really important. And also this has been thrown away by authorities. I mean, BFR, even misinformed, deceived the European Bundestag about this fact, because they were answered what is the reason why I got to a different conclusion as BFR, and BFR wrote that IARC had to do a hazard assessment and BFR would have been obliged to do a risk assessment. So this is really written in an answer to the Deutsche Bundestag in 2015. And the BFR still is alive. No one did ask for that. No one is taking them to accountability. This is what we do not understand, because the hazard-based approach has been, I mean, it has been enforced by a democratic process, 7 years of discussion in Europe. And then they ignore it, and they also say it doesn't exist. And no one takes care about it. So yeah, this is also a main issue, I think. We didn't address it, especially in this complaint, but maybe we should even make a special paper on this, on the way how BFR, in my opinion, deceived the public and still deceives the public, because in newspapers, they always tell the same story, the same wrong interpretation of the law. And not only BFR, also the Austrian authorities, AGES, does it the same. Just a few days ago, and it was one of the bigger Austrian newspapers, that, yeah, of course, AGES had, and European authorities had to assess the risk of glyphosate other than Ajax. So, yeah, everyone thinks they're talking about carcinogenicity, but there's no risk assessment. Yeah.
Okay, for further press requests, I also put Helmut Burtscher's email address and a telephone number in the chat window, and also the contact data of our Global 2000 press officer. But in the meantime, there has been another question by Gabriele. Gabriele, do you want to ask this question?
Yes, yes, I can ask. No, what in an Italian program report, journalist program in the third channel of the state, they made an analysis on the Italian, some Italian pasta famous, and they found the presence of glyphosate in this pasta, some famous firms like Barilla or others, but they said that the percentage of glyphosate in this pasta is so low that should not dangerous. That this quantity of glyphosate you can find in your plate is so low that it's not dangerous. So in some way, they told the Italian public that what they didn't know, that part of the pasta of Italy is made from Canada, from grains from Canada, from cereals imported from Canada. These cereals used cultivate using glyphosate, even if in Italy they don't use it, so they can get this glyphosate in the pasta. But on the other side, so the percentage is so low that it's not dangerous. So what I would like to ask, if the European authorities can maybe say or decide that a certain percentage of glyphosate, even if it's dangerous in huge quantity, in small quantity, is not dangerous, so they can afford the use of it. That's it. Thank you.
Shall I respond? I mean, I think. Oh, François, do you want to respond? No, I don't see it. No. Okay. I
can words of. Well, can you hear me? So, yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
The problem is that here again, there is a confusion between evaluating the danger of glyphosate and a proper risk assessment, because of course, under the ability to take substances out of the market using cutoff criteria, which are based on the intrinsic dangerous characteristic of the product, not using a risk assessment approach. So the intrinsic property of the chemical to product produce to under the European legislation to prove that there is such a risk to take the chemical out of the market. Only a classification as a potential probable carcinogen is sufficient to use this cutoff criteria approach. So once again, it shows us that the various agencies at the EU or national level have a wrong approach based on risk, because in fact they don't want to use the danger approach. In the back of their minds, are still doing some sort of risk assessment systematically. And this is also, of course, the point of industry. But what is sad is that apparently agencies often have the same point of view and and they are reluctant to use the danger approach. Because with the danger approach, you don't have to evaluate the quantity of product you're exposed to. When you evaluate the quantity of products, you are doing a risk assessment. Here, no need to evaluate the quantity, no risk assessment. With the cutoff criteria, you can get rid of a substance only because of its properties.
Okay, thank you, Francois. In the meantime, there has been another question by Kate Tropp from EU Food Policy. She obviously has problems with her microphone, so she wrote her question via email. Her question is, when you, Helmut, said that 94% of the BFR report was copy and pasted, was that 94%? Was it 94% of the total report or 94% of certain sections?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It was 94% of the 46 pages that I presented on the presentation. And these 46 pages are pages from the sub-chapter on published data about DNA damaging effects of glyphosate or glyphosate-based formulations in the published independent literature. So there are 60 studies, even more, but I did not count those with human exposure because they were not represented in the industry studies, but this result is the same. And there's not one study that has been evaluated by BFR. And the reason why, and if you compare it to the dossier, to the industry report, then you find 94% of the text is completely identical to the industry report. And if you look to the first draft assessment report that has been published by BFR in December 2013, it is even more than its 99% that is copy-pasted, because the yellow parts have been added later, because then later studies were submitted from the consultation, for example, and those studies, they could not copy-paste anymore from the dossier because they were not included there. So that's it. We do not know how much of the whole BFR report is copy-pasted. This has many reasons. The report has 4,322 pages. And only part of this is made or responsible of the BFR, because other German organizations like the Julius Kühn Institute, the Environmental Agency, did also assess other properties of glyphosate. So the chapter or the part that we looked on is a part about 1,000 pages on toxicology and metabolism, volume 3, I think. And if you look there, you have copy-paste not only in the 3 chapters that we did evaluate in our report, or not we, but the plagiarism expert Stefan Weber did evaluate. It was the chapter on genotoxicity, on carcinogenicity, and on reprotoxicity, because these were the cutoff criteria, the hazard-based ones. But if you have a look on acute toxicity, you find the same scheme. So also there, they just did copy-paste the evaluations and summaries and interpretations of published studies as they were prepared by industry. So what I think what should be made, and what is a question of resources, a question of money, a question of time, is to have a all-in-all evaluation of plagiarism in the whole report. Because it would be interesting, for example, to find out if it's true what BFR said, that all authorities all over the world make it like that. I had a look, for example, in the ecotoxicology section, which was not made by BFR, and I didn't find any copy-paste, but I didn't investigate all the many hundred pages. But I think it would be interesting to find out, and it would also be interesting to find out how much copy-paste has been happened in volume 1 of this report.
Okay, thank you, Helmut. In the meantime, there has been another question by Madame Stéphane Aurel. here the word is yours.
Thank you. It's more the background question. I mean, you could, and it's demonstrable that there was the text is unchanged from the glyphosate task force dossier and the BFR and then EFSA report. The thing I'm wondering is, do you, in the case, have to demonstrate that they didn't make their own assessment? Because you can demonstrate it's exactly the same text, and but when you ask BFR and EFSA, they say they did their own assessment, that they checked, and they came to the exact same conclusion. So, and for exactly the same number of studies, they came to the exact conclusion, same wording of analysis. But how do you demonstrate that they didn't actually check each study? And I mean, this is the tricky part. Do you have, in the case, in the tribunal, have to demonstrate that they didn't do their own assessment? I hope it's clear. My question.
When the question is, it's maybe a question about probability. When there's a probability, if you look at 60 pages, yeah, maybe we need a statistician, yeah, at court, yeah, who does some math on probability, that when you look at 250 studies, the probability that independent evaluations of two parts, one is industry and one is an authority, lead to not only the same results and assessments, but also to the same arguments and even to the same maybe wordings, grammars, so everything is the same. Yeah. So this is the one thing. I think in the end, it's not us to decide. Yeah. I mean, I have my opinion, and this opinion, I have no doubt personally that they did not make an assessment, and this is also supported by the fact that EFSA decided in May 2015 to come out with an evaluation somewhere in the future, yeah, when so many people should be involved before, according to the EU procedure, yeah, and it didn't matter for EFSA maybe, yeah. What did matter is to be in line with US EPA, with an authority that was really in not the authority, but the main chair of the cancer assessment risk assessment group, yeah, CARC, was in very, very close contact to Monsanto, according to the Monsanto papers, and he had another law. He was obliged to do a risk assessment. I think he did not. He did not do a risk assessment. He just also did go into one direction. But EFSA never was obliged to do that. So these collusion, this potential collusion, I think is a very stark hint that there was no interest in doing independent assessment of the risks, which is really a shame, because the risks are hard facts. They are hard risks for health. Yeah? And if it's true what IAC found out, then that will lead to people getting cancer, that will lead to people die because of cancer. And I think this is something that, yeah, that makes this question, of course, important.
Can I add a word on that? Because it's a problem of statistics. It's also a matter of logic. Because let's assume that EFSA did its all review of the studies. It's a huge work. So it wouldn't have been a huge additional work to use their own words to reflect their own work. So assuming that they did this job, really, I don't know, I doubt it, but assuming they did it, why didn't they use their own language? So can you imagine that an agency does such a big work and then makes the choice just to copy the job from someone else? I don't know where is the logic in there.
Okay, are there any further questions? If this is not the case, then I say thank you to all of you who have been part to this online press conference. If there are further questions, as already said, I put in this chat window the contact data of our press officer, and yeah, you have my email address, so don't hesitate to contact us, and yeah, we are ready to help you with all your questions. Okay, and if there are no further questions, then thank you again. Thank you for being here, and have a nice day, and goodbye. See you next time.
Thank you.